Ladies, hi. You've just been let into the room, and I think lots of other people will be doing the same. Jaina, Mika, we're going to introduce you in a second, and we're going to let all the people that have signed up to listen from you both today take 60 seconds to press, click, enter, settle in, get themselves a cold drink,
Wonderful. Nice
and
to
get
be
ready for
here.
some
Thank
Alumni
you
quiz.
for
Thank you, Jaina. Where are you
thanks
both
for the
today? Whilst we
invitation.
have a minute to let everybody in, where are you calling in from?
Okay, I'm in Beaverton, Oregon, 2 miles door to door from Nike's World Campus.
And I'm
What
in
about you, Mika?
Atlanta, Georgia.
Very good. We've got all the coasts, and I today am unusually, as you can possibly tell, certainly Jaina, you've joined lots of our webinars, and I tend to have a large enterprise alumni subtly behind me, but I'm currently in Singapore in the dead of the night, which is why it's slightly dark with some rather pretty oriental art behind me. Well, look, we've got everybody slowly joining, and we can see that the ticker moving up bit by bit by bit. But I think what we might do is get started, because whilst we've got an hour, it's usually not quite enough to get through all of my questions, all of the chat, and all of the questions that we might have from all the people joining us. So I guess I'll kick off with a little tiny bit of housekeeping. Obviously, everyone's joined a webinar 100 times before, but just a reminder for those that are listening in today, please feel free to put questions in at any time, and I'll be reading them and we'll filter them in at the right time or at the end. There may be some polls that pop up, so do feel free to answer those as they come along. And then with no further hesitation, after the 90 seconds we have given everybody, I'm going to do a little bit of an introduction to you both. It gives me great pleasure to introduce the next Enterprise Alumni webinar on the power of stories, which is with 6453, the Nike alumni community. A little bit about 6453. It launched as an alumni-founded network of former Nike employees and former Nike-sponsored athletes, and was designed to activate their connections around the world, help alumni access best practices, learning, and amplify a collective desire to do good. As an independently founded community, which is quite unusual, it gets its name 6453, a question you must be asked all the time, Jaina, from the buttons you'd press on a phone keypad if you were writing the words Nike. So for all of those who wonder where that comes from, that is the answer. With us today, we've got Jaina Panfilio, who is a network co-founder, who spent nearly 30 years at Nike, quite a run. She held roles across administration, communications, marketing, and sustainability, and had a focus on innovation at their world headquarters in Oregon. Mika Cooper-Edwards has had a marketing career leading growth of global brands, not just for Nike, but also for Jordan, PepsiCo, Diageo, and Moët Hennessy. In 2017, she's going to tell us a little bit more about this afterwards, she founded Soleil Entertainment, a transcultural media company specializing in film and TV production, elevating stories and creators of the global South diasporas of Asia, where I am today, Africa, the Caribbean, Latin America, and the Middle East. So they're both joining us to discuss the use of storytelling to engage, and how the 6453 network members feel included and inspired as they transition from one stage of their career to the next. Before we dig in, ladies, and before we talk a little bit more about how you use storytelling to engage and how 6453 have done that successfully, I wanted to share the particularly inspiring message you have on your landing page from the Nike co-founder and chairman emeritus, Phil Knight, who is known to a lot of us, of course, as from the movies, and also most of us have a pair of Nike sneakers or something in our cupboard, where the message in itself really, I think, kicks off storytelling in just a few sentences. And I thought I'd share it so everybody could hear what he had to say when your network launched. From the early days of Blue Ribbon Sports, we tried to make the company that became Nike a special place. We did not want it to be a typical corporation. We could make it what we wanted, including a meritocracy where people of goodwill work together. We've not always succeeded in our high aspirations, but we have had some success, and indeed we are different. It's very gratifying to personally hear of the efforts to create a Nike Alumni Association dedicated to good works, created entirely by people who were not company founders. It's another positive step in our initial vision. So speaking of initial vision, Jaina, can we kick this off with you? Can you tell us a little bit about what the inspiration was and the trigger for the birth of your alumni network?
Sure. Hearing Phil Knight has always inspired me. So every time I hear that, I get a little choked up. Working at Nike allowed me to have several jobs across the company, and I have been able to meet some of the most creative and talented people, including world-class athletes around the world. And so when I left Nike, I needed my community. You can see how, that becomes part of your life and your DNA. And since then, I've learned that that's a universal feeling from a lot of our alumni teammates. So, I've always been inspired by my teammates, my Nike teammates, but more than that, I've been inspired by our untapped collective potential. So I made it my mission to formalize a Nike Global Alumni Network.
Yeah, no small feat. And like everything, like starting a business, which I know Mika's subsequently done, you don't necessarily know what you're getting yourself into. But I know, I remember the early days. And as I said, a couple of questions just to kick it off about how it started. So all with you, Jana. How does it fit with Nike? Because essentially the brand experience, their values, their aspirations are all wrapped into the name Nike, and this is for the community but run externally. And how have you earned top level endorsement? I mean, particularly from Phil Knight himself, who is sitting on your website with a wildly encouraging and inspiring message.
Yes, we believe we're an extension of the Nike brand values and culture. And Phil Knight inspired us with his audacious dream to start a sneaker company in service of athletes to improve their performance. And we've taken Nike's mission very seriously. And that mission is to bring inspiration and innovation to every athlete. And the asterisk is, if you have a body, you're an athlete. And as a team, we built one of the most recognizable brands in the world. And so we live by the enduring Nike mantra, there is no finish line. We're still curious, we're still driven, we're still cultivating an innovation mindset. So we're unleashing the power of the 6453 alumni community to move the world.
I learn a different Nike quip every time I speak to you, because the whole, if you've got a pair of sneakers or a body, everyone is an athlete, is something I use to justify not going to the gym, but that's not what we're discussing today, Gina. Doing it independently, which I know a lot of people listening in is not the case necessarily, but nonetheless, you are celebrating a brand and you're celebrating a culture and community that you all come from. Did it make it harder to make a splash? We know, I personally know you've worked very, very hard to make this work with fewer resources in particular than your corporate colleagues might have access to. How have you worked with those limited resources? How did you overcome this? And I think the reason I ask this is not just because we'd like to hear how you've got this far and how you've grown the network, but quite often when we're talking to people as an alumni software company, I always say that alumni managers are like entrepreneurs. They do a lot with a little. They have limited resources. You have, a company that says, hey, we really want to launch this. And of course, you've got tens of thousands of people that could be in a community, and one person is not enough. People often struggle with what they've got to make this successful. So I think probably there's lessons to learn from you, regardless of whether this is run externally. Can you share a little bit about, how it really, really started and then how you've been able to scale?
Yeah, absolutely. We're a startup, just like, Mika's experienced as well. We're like you said, we're self-funded and we operate independently of Nike. Among other things, Nike taught us resilience. And so we've overcame that absence of dedicated funded by hard work and engagement with the community. And a majority of our funding comes from our members, actually. We do have business sponsors. We moved from a membership model to a sponsorship model, and our day-to-day operations are the result of passionate army of volunteers. And we're playing the long game, really. You have to build a momentum, and it takes time to demonstrate value and create sustainable funding to fuel operations. It's hard. We're not where we want to be, but we're learning. We're still learning.
Yeah, and I think that's the same for everybody we speak to, right? There's not a single company or customer that we have or non-customer that we might speak to who says we've got a brilliant team that's enough for the work that we have to do, and we're reaching everybody. There's only so many things you can automate, and there's a lot of human interaction needed. And I guess one more final question about how this kicked off, and it probably ties in quite nicely to how Mika got involved. how did you spread the word to alumni? Because obviously, if you've worked at a company for 30 years, you must be a walking alumni network. You must know a lot of people. How have you got people to the platform? And have you thought about who you could or should invite? Because I presume there are interns, as you mentioned, there are athletes, there are people that are involved in other sponsorship related to Nike. Who are your community, and how have you started to reach them? And how did it come to be, I suppose? And we can then pass to kind of pull Mika into this to introduce her and ask her some questions.
Yes, well, it's taken a while to build awareness of 6453. When I was at Nike, it took a long time to get any kind of momentum or buy-in or sort of engagement on different platforms or different engagements. But we're using the power of our network, reinforced by ongoing communications and events. And the people that we're inviting are former Nike employees, so with a badge and an employee number, and former Nike sponsored athletes.
Awesome. And Mika, how did you hear about this? Not a question I've prepped, but I guess a great way to pull you in. How did you come to hear about this? And then we'll just sort of kick off with a little bit of a chat about storytelling.
Yeah, so we actually, I guess maybe a precursor alongside this, we have a Nike woman network called the Wing Woman. And Jana is a member of that. I'm a member of that. And it was through that I learned that she had started 6453. Admittedly, I was a late member in joining. I didn't join from the very inception. And it was because I was a part of so many different communities, which I know we'll get into in terms of like everybody's forming a community, right? And so it was like, okay, what made this different? And so after having more conversation with her and understanding, Wing Woman has its place as a female support network for ex-Nike women, but the broader 6453 mission, I think, is so powerful, so inclusive and so global that it just felt like, those two things mattered. They each had their place, and it was important for me to be a part of both of them.
Yeah, and I guess it's the word alumni is typically, so long as you mean what you say with inclusivity, people are everywhere, every corner of the world, and yeah, it's just but it's a really kind of minimum viable small thing that does actually elicit a sort of heartfelt interaction with almost between two strangers. It's a lovely sort of tribe of people. It's a lovely community, and we obviously live and breathe it. I live and breathe it, and that's wonderful to hear. I guess, can we talk a little bit about, and I can see by the way that there are people starting to ask questions. In case you think that I'm not spotting them, I am. I'll pull them in at the right time, or if they've already been answered, pick them up shortly. We're here to talk a little bit about storytelling. Maybe I can kick off to ask you both, what does storytelling mean to you both, in the context of Nike, in the context of its alumni community? And Jana, I know you've highlighted recently teammates such as Sean Tresvant, who's the CEO of Taco Bell, Sophie Bambuk, who's the CMO, forgive me, of North Face, and you've got Nikki Neuberger, who's the Chief Brand Officer of Lululemon. They've all been in the press lately, but it's not just corporate alumni, but also athletes that you get to do storytelling about. Do you think, a long question, but do you think within that, when you talk about storytelling, that Nike has a head start? Because I feel like when I hear the word Nike, there's just 100 stories of adverts and athletes and people that I want to hear from. Maybe we'll start with you, Jana.
Yes, you're right. Storytelling at Nike is at the center of the product of all products and experiences. It's really essential to everything that we did at Nike, and essential to communicating why Nike matters, the product matters, the experience matters, mostly the product, and the performance aspect of it. But it's really at the core of everything. And Nike is part of our personal journey. We love to celebrate our community members, what they did at Nike, what they're doing now, what's next. And so it's so exciting to see our alumni teammates going on from Nike to really make an impact on the world. And it's a joy, and it's an honor to share that.
Mika, what about you? Can I ask you to share a little bit too? Yeah.
Yeah, I would say on a personal level, I feel like Nike laid my foundation for storytelling. Um, segueing from Jana's point, like it's so central to everything that we did at the company. And so everything was grounded in this insight, personalized human insight. And I like to say that, that was the building block for being able to tell stories and, the authenticity, the power of the human potential to move society forward. That's really what storytelling means to me. And I was able to really build on that foundation and transition to other industries, other brands, but specifically film and TV, right? Which is all about stories, right? That's storytelling at the highest level, I would say, from an experiential standpoint. So, it was really important to me throughout my entire career, even past Nike, to draw on that foundation, to draw on what I like to call Nike was my master's in storytelling before I even got a master's in media, right? So yeah, it means a lot. I think it's now in society become central to everything that we do. Especially when it comes to business, it used to be seen as more folklore and a little bit more of a nice to have, but I
Yeah.
think we can admit now that storytelling is paramount for any successful brand, any successful business or community.
Yeah, I think there was an element of it's touchy-feely
Yeah.
or it's a little bit soft. But if we think about,
Correct.
we do a lot of A/B testing, a lot of group analysis, and the thing that people most click on, the thing they're most interested in, even if they didn't know somebody, is what are former colleagues doing now? And I think, no doubt it's hard if you're doing this for somebody who is a corporate lawyer who's a litigator, because likely they've gone on to be a litigator somewhere else, right? So the stories might have litigation at their heart, but people in their spare time do so many interesting things. And I think, that it's the stuff that used to be, I think, touchy-feely, but actually is the charity work or the leaving and starting a business or the, you don't have to just be an athlete. But have you had, Jana, much interest from athletes? Have you reached out to them? Have they wanted to be part of this too?
Yeah, we've reached out to athletes, and we're continuing to pursue athletes joining our community. We currently have about 10 athletes from across different sports, a couple of world-class Olympians as part of our community, Ashton Eaton and Shannon Box. And we're just excited to include them in our community. One final point, I guess, on the storytelling aspect is that we've really taken the principles that we've learned from Nike and in terms of surprise and delight, surprising and delighting our consumers, we've really taken that to this community. And it's really important for us to continue to surprise and delight our own community members, and give them something a little bit unexpected and than they might have been expecting in a usual or a typical alumni organization.
Yeah, maybe you have, I think, less of the boundaries, limitations, I don't know what the right word is, requirements of a very heavily corporate community. And that's, but all alumni networks and all alumni communities have their own nuances, and you just have an incredibly well-known global brand name and some incredible stories, as well as, people and athletes. And the stories you share and the community that you share, I saw way back in February, there were obviously redundancies that were announced at Nike. And there was a great, in fact, you had some coverage, Jana, and there was some other press around how the 6453 network was preparing to help workers land on their feet. Given you're an external organization, you're obviously not driving boomerang hires as one of your core KPIs, and you're not pulling in jobs feeds to kind of land people roles elsewhere, or like a law firm or a professional services firm that wants to place people with their candidates. That's not what you're all about. So how have you been able to kind of step into some of the other types of storytelling, which is around tougher things like, say, waves of redundancies?
Yes, it's a difficult situation, and we're not necessarily prepared for the onslaught of new members, but we see ourselves as a landing place for people to come and connect with our community members and connect with alumni and feel that they're part of the community, even though they're no longer with the brand. And, it's what we've tried to say is, and communicate is that no matter when you left, how you left, you're always a part of the community. Your time at Nike is valued and valuable to others. And so it's been a really amazing to see our community come together in those moments to be able to be of support in so many ways to our community members that are just transitioning from the brand to their next chapter.
And it's all part of different storytelling. And I guess, Mika and Jana, I'd love to hear from you both. You, Mika, in all of your roles, and Jana, I guess in your role as founder, you're communicating with lots of different types of groups of people, different demographics, people that have different levels of interest. Some people just want to hear from you occasionally and just want to know that they're part of the club, and some people feel this at their core and are at all your events and everything online. How do you approach tailoring to different sort of groups of people? Do you tell different stories? I'd love to hear from you both about that.
Do you want me to start, Mika, or do you want to start?
Go for it. You've got a little bit of delay, so we see your mouth.
I'll start. I'll start.
Go for it, Jana. Yeah.
Okay.
I'll start, and then you can just pepper in there.
Sure.
Well, I think what we try to do, no matter how long people have been at Nike, there are people from the beginning. We've got members that were there in the beginning from 1972 onwards to today. And so it's really important for me and the community to, I guess, position it in terms of no matter how you left, when you left, you're valued. And I guess that the difference between that is that I'm learning that the newest members with less than 5 years with Nike really missed out on the magic of the brand. And so we aim to show them what that magic feels like and looks like by being a part of our community. So I think, really the only thing we tailor to different groups is maybe by location or by sort of the roles that they've had. But everyone's a part of the community because they worked at Nike. And so we all have that shared experience and a shared mindset. And so that's what we leverage and we really build on.
And Mika, you left at a different time.
Anything to add?
Yeah, Mika, you left at a very different time to Jana, right? And as you say, people that have been there in the last 5 years, different experience to you. And that's one of the challenges all alumni communities face, which is the company is not the company that you left. Everybody left at a different time. People hold different memories. Mika, some comments from you there.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I think you hear a lot. I will put it into two groups. I left Nike in 2009, right? So I was part of that era, I believe, that Jana is referencing, right? Where there was a magic of the brand. There was a very universal understanding of what was priority, very consumer driven. And then, of course, as companies grow, right, they become maybe more commercially focused. They have more stakeholders to please, et cetera, et cetera. So many of, and this is the first group, there are people who were part of what I like to call that era, who then stayed at the company and saw it change over time, right? And had challenges and still have challenges adapting to those changes, or feel like in some ways that purity has been diluted to some extent, right? Or the values have shifted. And then there are people who I meet who came after that era, so to speak, and their perception, their relationship, their connection to the company is so different, right? And so I think I have a unique vantage point in a way of having left, prior to those two groups, to be able to compare and contrast with my own experience and how I connect to the brand and my memory of being there, and how I bring it into my current experiences. Like that's a lifelong thing. But one thing I'll just touch on really quick in terms of like the communication to different groups, one of Nike's maxims is the consumer decides. It was always my favorite one. And it's kind of the one I'm referencing there in terms of that pure insight, like everything came back to that. And that's where the storytelling aspect comes from as well. What building a community is one thing, but then knowing the community intimately well and solving problems, addressing the nuances of those communities is I would say increasingly important. And just in my work, in media, and in tech, continuous experimenting, learning, iteration. In tech we call that agile, but agile is not. They think they invented agile, but agile it might have happened slower in consumer. But that insight, and that continuous learning about the nuances of the community and how to service the different problem sets and different subgroups, cultures, etc., I think is more important now, because to that point, everybody, while yes, they worked at the same company, they didn't have the same experience of that company. They didn't leave the company on the same terms and with the same, emotion. So I think that's important to note.
Yeah, as you said, different eras, but also different terms, right? Some people leave happy, some people leave sad, some people leave mad. And this is, I love that the consumer decides. And I guess here, much like for your community, but for 6453, but for everybody that's listening, actually the community decides, and the community decides what's of interest. And I think that's really, really important, because I spend a lot of time talking to people about, there's two things that matter in alumni. One is a community that you feel that you're engaged with, and engagement is an extremely broad term. It doesn't mean people have to be listening to things all the time, but it's also like what switches people off. And you have the beauty of being able to engage with sort of profound storytelling that's very uplifting and just talks of the vibrancy of the golden years, whereas lots of alumni managers have maybe they have a smaller ecosystem, smaller universe, smaller world, smaller workforce, smaller pool of people to talk about. It's hard. But again, I revert back to what you've both said, which is, all communities are interesting. You just have to pull out the really interesting stories. I guess one quick question on technology before we kind of get to the members' experience, where you'll both be able to comment in different ways. But Jana, what's been the most important part of the capabilities of the program and platform in suiting your aims in establishing and supporting this community? Because I know that, whilst you have an army of fantastic volunteers, ultimately there are core things that just fall on the laps of the people that are doing this day to day.
Yes, thank you for that. We think it's starting with a central digital hub or platform of connection is so essential to enable our alumni members to connect with each other on our own terms, and starting with a business partner who shares our passion for member experience and can execute against that plan. I think the things like managing easy to manage admin tools and the flexibility to create a customized friction-free experience for our members is great. The tools to create content, enable members to create and share with each other. I think that's really important for us, because we are creating a two-way dialogue and with each other and allowing our members to communicate with each other. Search is huge. The searching for members are specific groups of what people say that they want when they want to join, and they want to be able to connect with people and making that easy for people to do is really important. Also, the reporting, collecting, tracking, measuring membership data, and enable us a deeper understanding our community, more than the storytelling like Mika mentioned, and to add to kind of those deeper conversations that we've had over the last 4 or 5 years with our community. So those are some of the key platform capabilities that we we think are super important.
Thank you. And obviously,
Mika,
we're
do you have
delighted
something
to
to
partner
add
with you.
to that?
I'll just say I'll zoom out a little bit. I think it's I think we're coming out of the era of when platforms, when digital platforms and tech platforms, particularly with different sides, what they enabled was breadth, right, and reach and access. I think now we're in the era of platforms providing depth, especially when it comes to community, right? And how does the platform infrastructure really enable the unique nuances and needs and problems that that community has with depth to it, right? So it's not just about connecting people, right? Because we could connect on Facebook, we could connect on LinkedIn, there's so many places we can connect, right? But what makes the platform uniquely a problem solver for that community? And I think 6453 has gotten to a good start with that. And I think, the ability for any alumni network to really be solved through the platform side of it is going to be dependent on that.
Yeah, thank you for that. And just questions are pouring in. So just to say, we're going to chat
one more.
about another.
Sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Jana.
No, I just had one more thing to add to that, Nika. That was beautiful. And I would say, so we've created our platform, which is, we like to consider an aggregated content that you can't get anywhere else. It's everything that everyone's doing. And that's the goal, is to be able to have one place that you go to that you can see all of the content on what our community members are doing around the world. And so that's a big one for us: content and connection, and the ability to see what's going on with our community.
Yeah, and you have a slightly unique community, because people are quite, there's a lot of depth of people trying. You use the word depth, Mika, which is really hard, because there's so many different kinds of deep that people want in a community, and they don't want to be in there all day long. And it's not like back in the day when there was like chat rooms, and we've all got so many different ways to connect. But it's like, kind of, can I find what I'm looking for when I go there? And I've got a quick question about member experience, maybe from Jana, from your perspective, and then Mika, I've got finding some questions for you. And just, we're going to chat for another 5-10 minutes, and then we're going to hit quite a lot of questions that are building up, although I'm weaving them in. How, Jana, other than finding each other, and obviously you do a lot to amplify the businesses and the interesting things that people are doing beyond just their day jobs in the network, what are ways that other people are using the network, your members?
Yeah, that's a great question. Some of it we're still learning, but we've created an area there on the site that allows people to see the resources that are available in their transition from Nike to Next, or any other chapter for that matter. We've got a lot of people at Nike who have taken their job and at the brand, and then created their own organization from it. So there's lots of coaches and talent scouts and that sort of thing. We've been really working on that resource base for people, and I think the biggest thing is the network and the directory, and then of course we create content around it's called Behind the Brand series, and it's an interview series where we share what people did at Nike. There's just a million stories to tell people. Mika's got her own million stories.
We're going to get to that.
To tell,
yeah.
And so does everyone else. It's really fun. It's fun to hear those stories. So we're still learning, like I said, and what's resonating best with our members.
Well, it does lead me to ask Mika a question. So I know from loads of chats with people over the years, not facilitated by you, Jana, that people have launched or grown businesses off the back of the network, right? Their client base, their customer base, their introductions all come from 6453, which I think is maybe slightly different to others. I mean, of course, if you're in professional services or whatever vertical you're in, technology, retail, you want to reach out to your peers if you can see them in a prospect. But it's a consistent theme of something that I've learned. And I can see a couple of questions where we've got people asking, you know, what's proven really successful from engagement in this sense, from people who have either external communities, a few, but I'm also seeing Rebecca Furstein from BBYO. So communities of people that are not just corporate, but people who have come together from a collective experience, so a youth group or something of that ilk. So I wouldn't mind tying that into a question for you, Mika, which is, can you tell us a little bit about your own journey from Nike, starting Soleil Space, and what your experience has been as being part of 6453? You know, what's been the role of this community in any way potentially in your life post Nike?
Yeah, so going back to what I said earlier about Nike laying my foundation for storytelling, this is not a linear story. So I actually left Nike in 2009. And at that point, through my career at Nike, I was in product, I was in brand, I was in merchandising, and I always felt like I was very passionate about the global side of the business. I was always working on the global side of the business. And I always found myself being almost like an advocate for the, you know, why we need to do the Japan version of the Air Jordan 2010, you know, or why we needed to tell the story of Manu Ginobili from Argentina, you know, and always advocating for the regions, for the athletes, and for those global stories. And that kind of bumped up against, I would say, just feeling like I wanted to tell bigger stories that went beyond the commercial cycle of things, you know, not just a season. Like some stories are movies in themselves. And so I would say that foundation, knowingly, I learned storytelling in the commercial capacity, but I didn't know at the time that it would parlay into a film career. And so from Nike, I went, I'm from Trinidad, in case people are wondering what accent is that, Trinidadian. So I went back to the Caribbean and worked for, you know, some of the big consumer brands that were mentioned, PepsiCo, Diageo, Moet Hennessy. But I was in the territory side. I wasn't in the global organization. And I felt like I had run the gamut, right? I had been on both sides of that, you know, spectrum. And I also felt like that storytelling me was getting a bit stifled, because when you're in the territories, you are more of a commercial arm. You're not in the center of the innovation, and you're not in the origin of the storytelling itself. And so that was the impetus for me to go back, study media. So I went to London, did my master's in media.
Good choice of city. Not that I'm being biased.
Right, yeah. So I went to the London School of Economics, did my master's in media there, and my thesis was in Nigerian film. And that blew me wide open, discovering that there's this African film industry that's, you know, does more films than Hollywood every year. And we don't get to see these stories in the West. And that set me on a quest. First, you know, leaving my master's, I did production. So I started a production company of my own, worked for some bigger production companies in New York, and some big titles that are now on Netflix, HBO, etc. And then I said, you know what, I really want to do this myself, really tell, you know, stories of people of color around the world. But then the pandemic hit, and that shut down all our production. And here's where the true entrepreneurship comes in, right? It's like, what do you do when that business plan doesn't pan out the way it does? But we always felt like, in our first-hand experience, the people who control the film industry, they control distribution and financing. And so building a tech platform that could house these stories and finance these stories and give a platform for them was important. And that's when we created the tech company that exists today. So that's been the journey. But Nike has always been not just the foundation, but what I've learned there has been a thread. And one quick thing I'll say, the launching of this tech company was enabled by my Nike relationships, because the Wing Women that I mentioned, that group of Nike women, one of them, and Jana was like the spark of this. She said, you should talk to Kate Delhagen at the time, about who's investing, because I needed to raise capital. And Kate, I didn't think she was investing tech. Everybody came from sports. I didn't know what everybody was doing. And Kate said, what are you working on? And then once I showed it to her, and this is where the universal kind of connection around innovation and work ethic and creativity, we have that language among Nike alumni. Once she saw it, she was like, we need to rally behind this. And so a group of 15 ex-female, ex-Nike executives, all female, they came together and were my first investors in my tech company.
Wow. That is, and that is a beautiful, as you say, elements of the universe coming together, but that common thread. But yeah, what an amazing outcome from being part of that community. And Jana, go you, because as an entrepreneur who's constantly going through funding rounds, I know that is very, very hard. I've got a couple of questions really on the kind of the next steps for 6453, and then we're going to pull some more questions in. But I must just add, this is the first time we've had so many comments, which not everybody can see, only I can see, saying big up TNT, which I presume is Trinidad and Tobago, including from Sabrina Tarbouche, who's at Schulte, the law firm. But it's the first time we've had quite a lot of territories, as you say, big ups, shout outs. Absolutely brilliant. And I can see quite a lot of questions to do with the output of the alumni program, including from Karen Chung, which we'll get to at the end. Bigger picture on alumni and the journey for your community. Maybe, Jana, we can just talk about some things that might provide some inspiration. Again, noting for those that joined a bit later that you are endorsed by Phil Knight, but you're an externally run community. What are your hopes for the future of 6453? And Jana, if I can just tap into that, a couple of questions that I'm reading for people. We've got a lot of questions that we always do about what's the ROI for a good alumni program? What's the return on investment? What do you consider to be successful? Is it about dollar amounts? And a quick reminder to those of us listening that 6453 is quite unusual in that it is actually was founded and is run from an external group of alumni who left the business. So Jana is not, whilst you may not have the resource and budget that a corporate alumni program has, she also is not in many ways constrained by the requirement of return on investment in quite the same way. So Jana, maybe you can just chat through a little bit about what your hopes are for the future, because you talk about, we're not where we want to be, which is what every aspirational person thinks about when they're building something. But tell us what's next, and tell us what a couple of key goals.
Well, we have big dreams and big ideas and big hopes for 6453. And one is just to be a thriving global network and community, and where we're, it's a place where we can all connect and help each other and work together. I think that's another goal that we have, is that we have some opportunities to work together on and solving some of the world's biggest problems. But that's another conversation. We want to empower our members to connect and engage more directly. We need to secure our sustainable funding model, which would allow us to hire full-time employees in order to deliver a premium experience. We want to establish official hubs in cities around the world. And we want to have a strategy in place to amplify our collective impact. So like you said, we are a nonprofit. We're a little bit of an unusual nonprofit in that we were starting for a fraternal organization, following in the footsteps of the Starbucks Green Apron Alliance. We didn't meet that criteria, so we are a 501c6, which is a mutual benefit organization. And so those are some of the hopes and dreams we have for our community.
Well, you said,
I guess you have a question around ROI. That's a good one. I think I didn't mention that, but we have, I think Having a thriving community, we know according to LinkedIn, and that's sort of the platform that I'm using as our quant data source, is that there are about 122,000 people that say that Nike was a past employer. So we know that that's not everyone, because not everyone is on LinkedIn. So just enabling those people to have visibility to our community and come together. We have some dreams about events that we want to do. And, but in terms of the ROI for us is that, that we're looking at, the measuring the amazing successes that our community is having around the world. That's one of the biggest ones, is that we're so proud to hear people like Mika's story, and that Nike as a foundation for our kind of achieving our own potential is having a ripple effect on the world.
And to be fair, Jana, thank you for that. To be fair, a lot of C-suite people would talk about ROI as actually being brand elevation. It's just a way to kind of own and control the narrative, but also share the stories that mean that people hear from us directly and say nice things about us when we're not in the room. Of course, that does not justify for a lot of people that want to do this or buy technology or get more resource. It doesn't justify it from a business case perspective. So for lots of organizations, it might be warm leads from business, it might be revenue generated, it might be social media following amplified, it might be boomerang hires, it might be referrals in terms of, and your, as we've said a couple of times, your network is slightly different. But I want to say one thing before I go to the next question, Jana. You said that some of the aspirations are around solving the world's biggest problems, but you've got, baby steps and a limited amount to do. But speaking as a female founder and knowing that under 1.2% of money in technology that gets raised goes to female founders, and even less to Black female founders, you already are, because Mika, you shared that story that really resonated with me personally, that your first 15 investors was all kickstarted from the Nike alumni. So that is, you actually are making a dent, Jana, just so you know. I mean, I know how challenging that is, and Mika surely does too. Yeah, so big up you for that. One or two more questions. For anyone else starting a network, and I guess, Jana, half of this question is to you. What are the most important things to do or to have when you're sort of starting off? And you touched on, I know I run a software company, but ultimately you do need tools and functionality so that you don't have post-it notes and emails coming out of your inbox. So a little bit about starting a network, what the important things to do and have. And Mika, maybe from your perspective, what are the most important things reciprocally from the other side of the table for a community to offer its alumni? So Jana, maybe we'll kick off with you.
I think I will. Ooh, that's a good one. I'm going to start off with maybe some personal characteristics. I think you have to have a lot of passion and perseverance and tenacity, and the ability to wear a lot of hats, and a propensity for action. So I know enough to be dangerous, because I know how to get enough things done, and to be able to have the kind of experience to show what this should look like, and what it, I call this a working proof of concept, actually, because we're always learning and growing, but taking sort of what Nike looks like, and the experience that we have there in terms of experience, being able to demonstrate that in a creative kind of output way. I think you have to have a pretty large personal network to build it from authenticity and a reputation of trust. And in terms of the alumni community, I really want to thank all of the knowledge, the alumni organizations that have come before us, and that have opened their conversation to me, and have been able to just give us so much knowledge and wisdom, and so that we didn't have to start from scratch. We could learn from what they've learned, and And so that's been super, super helpful to us. And I think to be clear about your why and what you do to reinforce the value proposition, I guess those are some of the things that I think come to mind first. So I'll turn it over to Mika.
I would just pepper in there with one comment, which is, your personal network, given you spent 30 years at Nike, has just been invaluable, like some of the other people who are volunteering and running this. I think, from a perspective of people who are walking into an organization where they're hired to do this, of course, they've got corporate resources at their fingertips. There's obviously social media, there's data enrichment tools. There's ways to build communities from nothing. You've had to do it from your personal network because you haven't had the budget or the opportunity to leverage everything else. So I think it was just worth mentioning that for some people, reminding them that you come from a slightly different perspective. Mika, some comments from you about, well, we already know what ways that the network has helped and ways that Nike has been really foundational, but anything else from you from a community perspective, what people want from their community? Free sneakers.
Yeah, I think from the perspective of forming the community, like you said, like sometimes you have to start a community from scratch without having the relationships, right? But that doesn't mean relationship isn't important. You still have to establish the relationship with those people, right? That you might be cold calling or that you might be bringing together. And also, you may have had a relationship in one context, but it's different in this context. And from there's where the real work begins, because forming the community is one thing, but how the community works is another. And I would say being laser focused on solving the problems of that community. And when we say problems, we're not talking about necessarily leaning into it's dark, what are the needs, right? What are the needs and what are the severe pain points around that need that need to be prioritized, right? Because there's so many things you could do. There's so many things that, and we talked about resources, right? Prioritization, I think, is just so key, of which pain points you address, which needs you serve, and in what order. And I would say curation, not just curation of the content, but curating the members. Like, who are the members that will be the sparks for the community? And how do you reward them, right? How do you put them in position to leverage their best strengths? But then how do you also reinforce that? How do you reward them for being the active tent poles to keep the community engaged? So yeah, in some, I would say, is to add value. Value has a few dimensions that could be in the form of resources, expertise, connection. What is a place where contributions are valued and where values are shared, right? So look at all the different meanings of values in that context. But I would say that's what as a community member I look for. And then as a community provider, I think those are the things to pay attention to.
That was so eloquent. That was a great list, because ultimately that's absolutely right. And I think one of the things I can see from some of the questions are the nuances of a question I asked Jana up front, which is, does 6453 almost have a competitive advantage in terms of alumni? Because there's sneakers and there's athletes and there's television adverts and we've all heard of it and it sounds very exciting and very glamorous, but actually, solving the pain points of your community, curation, rewards, resources, those are things that we can offer anybody wherever we are, whatever world they inhabit, right? So solving pain points of your community might be wanting a job, it might be extending your L&D, so maybe you had access to different learning tools whilst you were at your former company, you can extend those afterwards. Rewards, all of those things are, every single company on the planet has the capacity to extend that into the community that they are serving, their alumni community, in different ways. Maybe I will end with a couple of questions from the audience today, Jana. How do you amplify the stories of your community? Sure. And what communication vehicles do you use to tell those stories? I mean, obviously you've got your portal and you've got your newsletters, but how else do you do that? And maybe you could touch on, for those that don't know, but that I know, that you've got a board, but you've also got people around the world who act as a little bit like roles and permissions for corporates and having people in different offices around the world. You've got flag flyers everywhere. Maybe you could talk a little about activating people beyond the kind of newsletter and beyond the portal.
Sure. Yeah, we're doing a lot of communication through our social channels. We manage 2 LinkedIn groups. One is the 6453 Alumni LinkedIn group, and then another that's about 7,500 people. And then the other one is the Nike Employees Networking group, and that's about 19,000 people. Mostly are alumni, but there are some current employees in those groups. So trying to get the word out through there. We have a company page on LinkedIn. We're on Instagram, Facebook, and we are, posting our stories on YouTube. But this is a world that I'm not really familiar with, so we're learning every day. What's working and what's not working. But what we have been doing is, we've been engaging people in other countries in the world and that want to be a lead or want to, spark some inspiration and a community within those countries. We just had a happy hour in Shanghai put on by 2 of our alumni teammates there. And because so many people travel, that we make that known, these events known to everyone, so that in case they're in town, they can join in. So we're doing more sort of in region or in geo engagements, but we're just getting started, really.
But that, and Jana, that is transferable, because every single corporate alumni manager, or in fact C-suite sponsor, says, well, we don't think we can do any events at all, or maybe we can do one, or maybe we can do 1 or 2 a year. And actually starting small or activating pools of people who are particularly motivated is a great way to do that, right? It doesn't have to all be from the epicenter, whether the epicenter is you and the volunteers, or whether the epicenter is an alumni manager or in a corporate. Really kind of just captivating the people like Mika, who feel a sense of community, but also have other reasons that they can leverage and benefit from the network. Doesn't all have to be from you. So I guess, you particularly benefit from volunteers because you're particularly resource short, but it's no different to a corporate. Well, look, there are lots of other questions, some of which we've answered. I can see Mika doing a lot of big upping TNT as well. For those of you who haven't got to, we'll send you a message afterwards if you have any questions that you'd like to be picked up on. Really, that just leaves me to thank you both very, very much for joining us today. Jana, you've done an extraordinary amount of work and pushed a lot of rocks uphill with very, very little help and very little resource to start to pull together this incredible community of people. And Mika, thank you so much for joining us, telling us a little bit about the amazing work that your business is doing now. And as I say, there's so many things that we've learned from you telling us about how the community, you have benefited from 6453, but amazing to hear that your initial investors were sourced from here. I mean, that's just a cause for celebration. So ladies, thank you to everyone who's joined us today or will listen to us afterwards. Thank you very much. And obviously, if you want to have a little nose, you can't see everything that's behind the curtain of the sign up page, but you can look at 6453 Alumni if you want to have a peek more about what Jane has been talking about today. Ladies, thank you very much for your time, and look forward to continuing the conversation.
Yes, thanks so much.
Thank
Bye
you
bye,
so
everybody.
much for all your support.